Hello developers, welcome to day 28 of the 30 days of JavaScript challenge. Today presents another opportunity for us to tackle challenges and enhance our understanding of JavaScript concepts. We are just 2 days away, so let's dive in and make the most out of this learning journey. Today's challenge says, design an EventEmitter class. This interface is similar but with some differences to the one found in Node.js or the EventTarget interface of the DOM. The EventEmitter should allow for subscribing to events and emitting them. It continues and says that the EventEmitter class should have the following two methods, subscribe and emit. Subscribe method takes in two arguments, that is the name of the event as a string and a callback function. This callback function will later be called when the event is emitted. An event should be able to have multiple listeners for the same event. When emitting an event with multiple callbacks, each should be called in the order in which they were subscribed. An array of results should be returned, and you can assume no callbacks passed to the subscribe are referentially identical. And the subscribe method should also return an object with an unsubscribe method that enables the users to unsubscribe. When it is called, the callback should be removed from the list of subscriptions and undefined should be returned. So that is how the subscribe method should be. So let's go to the emit method. So the emit method takes in two arguments, that is the name of the event as a string and an optional array of arguments that will be passed to the callbacks. If there are no callbacks subscribed to the given event, you should return an empty array. Otherwise, return an array of the results of all callback calls in the order they were subscribed. So that is the challenge. That was too much theory. Let us now understand what we are supposed to do. By now, we already know that we are trying to create an interface that is similar to the EventTarget interface. So EventTarget interface is the interface that I've been using most commonly with the DOM. In the DOM manipulation, that's what I've been using. And it has some features like the add event listener, remove event listener, and the dispatch methods. So here, we know that this EventTarget interface, it has a wide range of objects like elements, the document itself, and the window objects. So in this challenge, you're trying to implement that. That's why you'll have a class, in this case, the EventEmitter class. And for us to use the things like in quotes, add event listener, we have to have an object. So to get an object, we'll first create an instance of that class. So this, if you try to relate it in the EventTarget interface, it's like declaring, we've said that the objects consist of something like elements. So if you use an element as an example, it's something like declaring let's say a button, then you can just get that button from the DOM. Something like document, get elements by maybe class, then you get that actual button. So this is how you get the object in the DOM. So here you just create an instance of this class that we will create. Then after you've created the object, to listen for events in the EventTarget interface, use the add event listener method to listen for events. So it is something like the name of the object, in this case maybe button, then something like add event listener, then you listen for some event, maybe some click event. Then when this event happens, you fire a function. This is how we do it in the EventTarget interface. So in this case, in this our example here, we will have a method called subscribe. And this subscribe method, it will be passed, we will pass an event and a callback function. Then just like the add event listener, I want when this event occurs, this callback function should be fired. But the question is, how will that event be fired? We know that in real world, the browser or even the framework is responsible for handling that event. It tells us when the event happens, and if it happens, it calls this function under the hood. So now in our class, we don't have a way of calling this function under the hood. That's why you have this emit method. So this emit method, you call it with the name of the event, then it checks if that event exists. If it exists, it fires that event. And if that event does not exist, it returns an empty array. That's what the challenge is saying. So in this case, if you call the emit with this first event, it will check if that first event exists, and indeed we have subscribed to it, so it exists. So we'll call this function, and this function returns 5. So if you call this emit, we'll expect to return an array of 5. It returns the output of callback 1, and callback 1 is this function that is there. So that is basically how we should implement this function. But it is possible that we have multiple callbacks on the same event. So maybe let me just duplicate this, so you can have multiple callbacks in the same events. So maybe this other callback, so let's say it will return something like 6, then it will be callback 2. So you can have more than one callback in the same event. The same event is still first event. So if you have the same callback in the same event, it will emit 2 values. That's why you are storing the values in an array. Because if there are 2, it will just emit 5 and 6 like that. So it will return the output of callback 1 and callback 2. So that is when it has 2 events. Because you can have multiple callbacks, even in a real world scenario, you can say maybe if you want something, when someone clicks a button, you want some 2 events to happen at the same time. So you can have some more than one callback with the same name, with the same event name. So that is how this function should work. Then another thing is that we should be able to unsubscribe from event. So in the EventTarget interface, you use the remove. To add it, we say add event listener. Then to remove, we say remove event listener. So in this case, we also want to implement a way of how we can unsubscribe from events. So how is this happening here? When you call subscribe to the emitter, we get back an object. So this one returns an object. So maybe I can store this in a variable. Let me call it const. Let me call it sb1 is equals like that. So when you call this subscribe, it should return an object. And when that object is returned, we can call the unsubscribe method on that object. So you can say something like sb1 dot unsubscribe, like that, unsubscribe. And then when we unsubscribe to when we unsubscribe to this object, when you call the emit, it should no longer return this event because we'll have unsubscribed to it. It seems confusing, but that actually makes sense because even in the event targets, we also sometimes remove the event listeners on something when under certain conditions. So that's what we're trying to implement in this and unsubscribe. So basically, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to have a way of, we'll create a class, then we'll have a way to create those objects. Then we should be calling the subscribe and passing the event and the callback function. Then we should be able to fire this events by calling the emit method. Also, you should be able to unsubscribe from the events by calling the unsubscribe method. But this unsubscribe method has to be returned by the subscribe. So if you first have to subscribe before you can unsubscribe. You cannot unsubscribe from something you have not subscribed to. So that's how this should be. So maybe you can go back to the examples that were given so that you can understand them even better. So let me open this challenge here. You go to the examples. So you can see in example 1, this is the example that I've used. First, they'll call the event emitter, and I've said that this one is for creating the object. Then they'll emit. So you're emitting and there's nothing. So you'll expect an empty array because you have not yet subscribed to anything. Now you'll subscribe, and this subscribe, the event is first event, then the function is this callback function that returns 6. And we'll subscribe again. Then this subscribe also is there. It's called the first event. Where is it? Oh no, the first one is here. It's a first event, and it will have the value 5. It will return 5. The second one is also called first event, and it will return 6. This one will be called back 2. It will return 6. So now if you emit, we expect the 2 subscriptions, both of them to emit. So this callback 1 I've said returns 5, callback 2 returns 6. So if you emit, we expect to get a value of 5 and 6, just like how we saw in that example there. Then in this case, they did not subscribe. So that is basically how it will happen. So I believe by now you've understood the challenge. Let us look for one that has the unsubscribe. This challenge does not have unsubscribe. Let's go to challenge. Example 3. Yeah, example 3 has this unsubscribe. So you can look at example 3. It has this unsubscribe. So first you create this object with the event emitter. This is what they have done here. Then they subscribe, and this subscribe takes in arguments, then joins those arguments using a comma. Okay, then they'll emit. So if you emit, do you expect this function to run? So it will take in the arguments that are passed, that is an array of 1, 2, and 3. Then it will return a string of 1, 2, and 3 separated by a comma. That means that that's what the function, the callback function, was doing. Then later they unsubscribe to that subscription. Now you can see this subscription return this sub object. Then use that sub object to unsubscribe. Then after you have unsubscribed, then you call the emit again. You expect an empty array because there are no longer no subscriptions since we unsubscribed to the previous subscriptions. So that's basically how I'm supposed to solve this challenge. I believe by now we are okay, so I'll just go straight to the solution. To solve this challenge, I'll create a class called EventEmitter. Then you're told that this class will have two methods, the subscribe and the emit method. Then the subscribe method takes in two arguments, the name of the event as a string, and the callback function. There I put them callback. Then the emit method also takes in two arguments, the name of the event, then an optional array of arguments. So if the arguments are not provided, they'll default to an empty string, an empty array. And if they are provided, it will be the actual array. That's why I put here args is equals to an empty array because it's optional. Okay. Then I created a constructor that declares an attribute events that is set to an empty object. So basically that is how I started this thing. So I'll start with the subscribe method. So the subscribe method is supposed to register callback for the specific events. So first we'll have to check if the events exist, and if it already exists, we'll append the callback to the array of callbacks, and if it does not exist, we'll create it. So first I'll check if it does not exist. So I'll say I'll put a note to check if it does not exist. So I'll say if this not events, I called it events. This actual attribute is called events. So this dot events, if it has a key of event name because it's an object, if it has this key. So if it does not have this key, so if it does not have the key, we'll create it and default it to an empty array. So I'll just say, let me just copy this. I'll just say this, that one is equals to an empty array. So if the name is not there, we'll create it and default it to an empty array. But if it is there, we'll just append the callback function to the array of callbacks. So I'll just say the same thing, then dot push. Then I push the callback function. So that is what I'm supposed to do. So first, we have said that this subscribe method, it registers a callback for the specific event. Then we add an event name to the event object if it does not already exist. And if it exists, we just append the callback to the array of callbacks for the specified event. Then at the end of the day, you're supposed to return an object. So at the end of the day, return an object, not an array, an object. And this object is supposed to have an unsubscribe method. So I'll just say unsubscribe, like that. This will be the key. Then the value will be a method, so I'll put it as a function like that. I'll use the arrow function syntax. Then what this unsubscribe is supposed to do, it's supposed to remove the specific callback from the list. This callback that has called this unsubscribe is supposed to remove it from the list. So there are many ways you can do that, but I prefer using the filter because this is an array. I can use the filter to filter out the actual callback that was called to this unsubscribe. So I'll just say something like the array. This is the actual array, so I'll just get that array like that. Then I'll say dot filter. You know that a filter method takes in a callback function. So this callback function takes in item, index, and array, and you know that each item of this array is a function, and in this case callback function. So I'll just say if cb, then and to filter out the actual callback function that is equal to the callback function that has called this thing. So I'll say if the callback function is not equal to callback, remove, let me subtract, I'll just do something like that. So this one, it will check if this callback function, it will loop through each item of this array, and it will check if that function is equal to that function that has called this method. And if it is equal, you remove it. So if it is not equal, keep it. And you say that this only keeps the ones that are not that return truthy. So if it is not equal, I'll keep it. And if to keep it, I want to store it in the same array. So I'll just assign this result to the same array like that. So that is basically how the callback, the subscribe is supposed to be. We have said that the main function of this subscribe is just to register a callback for the specific event. So we check if that event exists. If it does not exist, we create it and we default it to an empty array. And if it exists, we push that callback function to that array like that. Then we should return an unsubscribe method. And the work of this unsubscribe is just to remove that callback from the array. So we check if the callback, the object that has called this unsubscribe has that callback function. So if it has it, we just remove it. And that's what we do it like this. So this is how we create the subscribe. Then next we'll go to this emit. This emit triggers all callback associated with the specific events. Then you are told here, if there are no callback subscribed to the given event, you should return an empty array. So first we should check if there are no callback subscribed. So that is the first thing. And if there's no, we'll return an empty array. So I'll say if this one is falsy. So I'll just copy that and there. Then I'll put a note. So if this one if there's no callbacks subscribed, this one will be an empty array. So if there's no, I'll just return an empty array like that. Okay. And if there is, you should return an array of the results of the callback function in the order that they were subscribed. So I can just loop through this array. So this is the actual array. So I can loop through this array, then call each function inside the array, then return the results. Okay. So you can just use any, I prefer the map, but you can also use the for each. So I loop through this array using the map. And for each callback, so I know that each function is a callback. So say for each callback, and to return that callback, but I want to invoke it. And I'll invoke it with these arguments that are passed here. So I'll just invoke it with these arguments. There. But since this argument is an array, I'll have to spread it to each individual element first. Then at the end of the day, I want to return the results of this. So I'll just say here, return that. Okay. So that is how I'll implement this map. This emit is just to call these callbacks that are stored in this array, and that's what I've done. And if there's no callback, just return an empty array. So this is the solution to this challenge. We can test it with the examples. So we'll start with example 1. So let's go to example 1. So I'll just copy this code here. I'll just copy that and put it down here. Then save. So first we'll create an object. Then we'll call the emit on that object with the event name first event. Then we'll call subscribe. It's saying subscribe does not exist. Let me check. I think there's an error. Subscribe. I missed a spelling, so it should be subscribe. There should be a C here. Also here. Subscribe. There should be a C there. So I missed that spelling. Okay. I think now it's fine. So first I create the object. Then I call emit on that object. So in the first call, I expect it to return an empty array because there's no subscription yet. So it will, this if should be true and return this empty array here. Then next I'll call this subscribe and I'll subscribe the first event, and this will be the callback function that returns. No, this will be the first event. Then this will be a callback function that returns 5. Then I'll subscribe again with this same event name and another callback function the results 2. Then if I call emit now, I expect to call both the first function and the second callback function. So I expect it to be a result of 5 and 6. let me just log this emit so that I can see them in the console. So I'll log this. I'll log also this emit here. I'll also log it so that you can see at first I expect to see an empty array, then console. So this first log I'll expect to see an empty array, then the second log I'll see an array of 5 and 6. So let's save this code and run it so that we can confirm our solution is fine. And indeed I got an empty array and an array of 5 and 6. So yeah, that is it for this video. You can just try the example 2, 3, and 4. Maybe I can just try this example 3 because it had this unsubscribe. Can just try to see that unsubscribe also works. So let me copy that, paste it here. Then I'll log this emit here. Then also this emit here, I'll log it. Okay, so I expect the first I see an array of 1, 2, and 3. Then the next I'll see an empty array because I unsubscribe to that subscription. So let me save and confirm that it works. And indeed I got, first I'll get an array of a string 1, 2, and 3. Then next I'll get an empty array because I unsubscribed to the previous subscription. So that is it for this video, guys. This is the solution. See you in the next video. Peace out.